My name is Damien, 22 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in English literature, and back in my hometown of Mapleton for the summer before real life begins. Growing up in this small, tree-lined suburb was like living in a Norman Rockwell painting. Pristine front lawns, neighborhood barbecues, and an almost suffocating sense of knowing everyone's business. It's the kind of place where traditions matter and change comes slowly, if at all. But the most constant element of my life in Mapleton wasn't the seasonal festivals or the unchanging storefronts on Main Street. It was Troy Sullivan, my next-door neighbor, my partner in childhood adventures, my first and only best friend. And, though no one in Mapleton knows this part, the love of my life. Troy and I have known each other since we were 5 years old, when his family moved into the blue Victorian next to our white Colonial. Our mothers became fast friends, which meant Troy and I were thrust together for playdates before we could form our own opinions. Fortunately, we clicked instantly, two imaginative boys who preferred building elaborate worlds with action figures to playing sports with the neighborhood kids. As we grew up, our friendship deepened. We shared every milestone, learning to ride bikes, surviving middle school awkwardness, navigating the treacherous waters of high school. When we were 16, sheltered in the privacy of his basement during one of our weekend movie marathons, our relationship shifted. I couldn't tell you who moved first. Memory has softened the edges of that moment. But I remember the tentative press of his lips against mine, the terrified exhilaration that followed, and the silent agreement that what happened between us would remain our secret. For 6 years, we've maintained that secret with careful precision. In public, we're childhood friends, practically brothers. In private, when we can steal moments away from watchful eyes, we're something else entirely. The dual life was more manageable once we left for different colleges, Troy to study architecture at Cornell, me to pursue English at Amherst. Distance provided freedom, allowing us to be ourselves during holiday breaks and summer vacations when we returned to Mapleton. Which brings me to now, the summer after graduation, both of us back in our childhood homes, planning our futures while navigating the familiar constraints of small-town life. Troy had secured a position at an architectural firm in Boston starting in September. I had been accepted to a publishing internship in the same city. The planets were finally aligning for us to build a life together, away from Mapleton's watchful eyes. If we could just make it through one last summer under our parents' roofs. Earth to Damien, my mother's voice cut through my thoughts. We were sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open to rental listings in Boston. What about this one? It's in your price range and close to public transportation. I focused on the screen, examining the tiny studio apartment that cost more than anyone should reasonably pay for what was essentially a glorified closet. It's cozy. That's real estate speak for cramped, she said with a smile. But it's what you can afford on an intern's salary, unless you consider roommates. The question came with a pointed look that I carefully ignored. My mother had been subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, suggesting that Troy and I find a place together in Boston. From her perspective, it made perfect financial sense. Two best friends sharing expenses in an expensive city. From my perspective, it was both tantalizingly perfect and terrifyingly risky. I've thought about it, I said noncommittally. Troy and I haven't really discussed it. This was a lie. We'd discussed it extensively, staying up late on video calls during our final semester, imagining what it would be like to live together openly. The freedom to kiss in our own kitchen. The luxury of falling asleep together without setting an alarm to separate before dawn. Simple domestic dreams that felt revolutionary. Well, you should, she encouraged. You've lived together during summers at the lake house. You already know your compatible roommates. If only she knew just how compatible. I'll mention it to him. I promised, eager to change the subject. He's coming over tonight, by the way. Movie marathon. Just like old times, Mom said with a fond smile. I'll make sure to leave some snacks out. And I have book club tonight, so you boys will have the house to yourselves. I kept my expression neutral despite the flutter of anticipation her words triggered. Time alone with Troy was precious and increasingly rare since we'd returned to Mapleton. Between family obligations, catching up with high school acquaintances, and the general lack of privacy that came with living at home, we'd had few opportunities to be more than just friends. Thanks, Mom, I said, closing her laptop. I should go clean up my room a bit before he comes over. Since when do you clean up for Troy? She teased. That boy has seen your room in every state of disaster since kindergarten. I shrugged, already heading for the stairs. We're adults now. Gotta at least pretend to have standards. My bedroom remained largely unchanged from high school. Same blue walls, same twin bed, same desk where I'd written countless papers and college applications. I'd taken most of my personal belongings to college, leaving behind a space that felt both intimately familiar and strangely impersonal, like visiting a museum dedicated to your younger self. I changed the sheets, for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely, cleared some clutter, and set up the small TV for our movie marathon. As I worked, I found myself smiling at the memories embedded in this room. Troy and I studying for AP exams, planning summer road trips, comforting each other through heartbreaks that no one else knew were real. My phone buzzed with a text, "Be there in 20. Bringing that wine cooler stuff you pretend to hate, but actually love." I typed back, "I have sophisticated taste now. I drink craft beer and use words like oaky to describe wine." His response came immediately. "Sure you do, literary boy. See you soon. Red heart." The heart emoji was new, a small act of digital courage we'd only recently allowed ourselves. Even our text conversations had maintained plausible deniability for years, just in case a parent glanced at a screen at the wrong moment. True to his word, Troy arrived 20 minutes later, letting himself in with the familiarity of someone who's practically family. I heard him greeting my mother downstairs, their voices warm with the ease of long acquaintance. Then his footsteps on the stairs, a rhythm I could recognize blindfolded. "Knock, knock," he said from my doorway, though he'd already pushed the door open. "Room service." He stood there holding a six-pack of fruity wine coolers, a bag of chips tucked under his arm, grinning that crooked smile that still made my heart skip after all these years. Troy had always been handsome, but at 22, he'd grown into his features in a way that turned heads. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of reluctant high school swimming, with dark hair that perpetually fell across his forehead, and eyes the color of bourbon in sunlight. "You actually brought that sugary garbage," I said, unable to keep the fondness from my voice as I closed the distance between us. "Only the best for you," he replied, setting the drinks and snacks on my desk before turning back to me. Hi yourself," I murmured, glancing quickly toward the hallway before rising on my toes to press a brief kiss to his lips. "Mom's leaving for book club soon." His eyes darkened slightly at the implication. "Good to know." He moved past me to sit on the edge of my bed, bouncing slightly, as if testing the springs. "Man, I can't believe we're back here. Feels like high school all over again. Except we're legal adults now," I pointed out, joining him on the bed. "With degrees and everything. Terrifying, isn't it?" He flopped backward, staring at my ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars had been arranged in actual constellations, his handiwork from sophomore year astronomy class. "Sometimes I think I've just been pretending to be a grown-up for the past 4 years." I lay back beside him, our shoulders touching. "I don't think anyone actually feels grown up. We just get better at faking it." "Profound," he teased, turning his head to look at me. "That English degree is already paying off." I elbowed him gently, but held his gaze. In the fading afternoon light filtering through my bedroom window, his face was softer, more vulnerable than the confident mask he wore for others. This was the Troy only I got to see. Thoughtful, occasionally insecure, deeply feeling. "I've missed you," I said quietly. "I mean, I know we've both been back for 2 weeks, but—" "I know what you mean," he interrupted, reaching for my hand. "It's different here. We have to be different here. The weight of our shared secret hung between us, simultaneously binding us together and keeping us apart. In Mapleton, we were always performing, careful not to stand too close, to touch too long, to look at each other with too much naked affection. Mom was asking about apartments in Boston. I said, changing the subject to something more hopeful. She thinks we should be roommates. Troy's smile turned wry. My mom suggested the same thing yesterday. Said it would be practical and comforting to have a piece of home with me in the big city. If they only knew, I murmured. What would happen if they did know? Troy asked, his voice careful, neutral. It was a question we'd circled around for years without directly addressing. What would happen if we stopped hiding? If we told our families, our hometown, the truth about us? Before I could formulate an answer, I heard my mother's voice calling up the stairs. Damien, I'm heading out now. There's money for pizza on the counter if you boys get hungry. Thanks, Mom. I called back. Have fun at book club. We listened in silence as she gathered her things, called another goodbye, and finally closed the front door. The sound of her car starting and pulling out of the driveway followed, and then, blessed silence. Troy's hand tightened around mine. Alone at last. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the pretense of casual friendship falling away like a discarded coat. Troy rolled toward me, propping himself up on one elbow, his free hand coming up to trace the line of my jaw. Hi, he said again, but this time the word carried different weight. Hi, I echoed, already breathless with anticipation. When he kissed me, it was with the intensity of 2 weeks of restraint. His lips were warm and familiar against mine, tasting faintly of the mint gum he always chewed. I responded eagerly, my hands finding their way to his hair, his shoulders, the solid warmth of his back. The twin bed that had seemed perfectly adequate in high school now felt cramped, but neither of us cared, too caught up in rediscovering each other. God, I've missed this, Troy murmured against my neck, his breath hot on my skin. Missed you. We see each other almost every day, I pointed out, though I knew exactly what he meant. Not like this, he said, pulling back slightly to meet my eyes. Not the real us. The real us. The phrase echoed in my mind as we continued to kiss, to touch, to relearn the contours of each other's bodies. Was this the real us? These stolen moments, these secret embraces? Or was the real us the careful performance we put on for the world, the platonic friends who never crossed the boundaries of socially acceptable male friendship? Both, perhaps. Both real, both true, both incomplete on their own. As the evening deepened into night, we moved seamlessly between the different versions of ourselves, lovers tangled in my childhood bed, then friends sprawled on the floor watching movies and drinking those ridiculous wine coolers, then back to lovers as the credits rolled and restraint abandoned us once more. It was nearly midnight when we finally put on the last movie of our marathon, both of us drowsy and satisfied, curled together on my bed with my laptop balanced precariously on our legs. Troy's arm was around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. We should get that apartment together, he said suddenly, his voice vibrating under my ear. In Boston. I tilted my head to look at him. Yeah. His expression was serious, determined. I'm tired of hiding, Damien. I'm tired of pretending we're just friends when we're so much more. Troy, I know. It's complicated. Our families, our history, this town. But we're about to start our lives in a new city. We have a chance to live honestly. His fingers traced patterns on my shoulder. Don't you want that? Of course I wanted it. I'd been dreaming of it for years. A life with Troy where we didn't have to calculate every touch, monitor every glance. But the idea of appending the careful balance we'd maintained, of potentially disappointing our families, terrified me. What if it changes everything? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if our parents can't accept it? What if it ruins their friendship? What if it doesn't? Troy countered. What if they surprise us? And even if it's hard at first, shouldn't we give them the chance to know us, the real us? He was right, and I knew it. We'd been having variations of this conversation for years, always circling back to the same impasse, my caution against his courage. But something felt different tonight. Perhaps the looming reality of our move to Boston, perhaps the growing weariness of maintaining our double life. Okay, I said finally, the word both terrifying and liberating. Let's do it. Let's get the apartment together. And let's tell them. Before we leave for Boston. The smile that broke across Troy's face was like sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. Really? You're ready? No, I admitted with a shaky laugh. I'm terrified. But you're right. It's time. He kissed me then, soft and reverent, his hand cradling my face as if I were something precious. We'll do it together, he promised. One step at a time. We fell asleep like that, tangled together on my too small bed, the laptop forgotten at our feet, secure in the knowledge that my mother wouldn't be home until morning. It was a luxury we rarely allowed ourselves in Mapleton, the risk of discovery too great, the habit of caution too ingrained. I woke disoriented in the gray light of early dawn, momentarily confused by the warm weight of Troy's arm across my chest, the unfamiliar sensation of another person breathing beside me. Then memory returned, along with a spike of panic. What time was it? Had my mother come home? Carefully extracting myself from Troy's embrace, I fumbled for my phone. 5:47 a.m. Mom would still be asleep at Carol's house, where book club always evolved into wine and gossip until the early hours. We were safe. I slipped back under the covers, allowing myself the rare pleasure of watching Troy sleep. He looked younger, more vulnerable, his usual animated expression smoothed into peaceful repose. A surge of tenderness washed over me, followed by a fierce protectiveness. We deserved a chance at happiness together, openly and honestly. Troy stirred, his eyes blinking open slowly, focusing on me with sleepy confusion that quickly melted into recognition and warmth. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Morning, I whispered back. It's early still. He nodded, pulling me closer. Good. Don't want to move yet. We dozed like that, drifting in and out of consciousness, exchanging lazy kisses and whispered conversations about nothing in particular. It was the kind of simple intimacy we'd rarely been able to indulge in, the quiet, ordinary moments that couples take for granted. The sound of a car door slamming jerked us both fully awake. I sat up, instantly alert. That's Mom's car. Troy was already moving, grabbing his t-shirt from the floor and pulling it on. What time is it? Almost 7, I said, checking my phone. She's back earlier than usual. We scrambled to make the room look less incriminating. Troy straightened the bed while I collected empty bottles and snack wrappers, both of us moving with the practiced efficiency of long habit. Within minutes, the evidence of our night together had been erased or disguised. Troy sitting at my desk chair while I perched on the edge of the bed, a respectable distance between us, the laptop open to a paused frame of the movie we'd allegedly been watching. The front door opened and closed, followed by my mother's voice calling up the stairs. Damien, you up yet? Yeah, Mom. I called back, hoping my voice sounded normal. Troy stayed over. We fell asleep watching movies. I figured as much, she replied. His mom texted me. I'm making coffee if you boys want some. Troy and I exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. Was it safe? Had we reset the scene convincingly enough? We should go down, Troy said quietly. It'll look weirder if we hide up here. He was right, of course. We'd done this dance before, transitioning from lovers back to friends at the sound of a parent's returning car or an unexpected knock on the door. It was second nature by now, a performance we'd perfected over years of practice. In the kitchen, my mother was moving about with the slightly sluggish energy of someone who'd had too little sleep and perhaps too much wine. Her book club readings were notoriously light on literary discussion and heavy on Cabernet Sauvignon. "Morning, boys," she greeted, pushing a strand of graying hair behind her ear. "Late night. Movie marathon," Troy explained easily, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen island. "Lost track of time." She smiled at him with the affection of someone who's watched a child grow up. "Some things never change. You two have been having movie marathons since you were in middle school." If only she knew how much had changed, how much had stayed hidden beneath the surface of our friendship. "How was book club?" I asked, accepting the mug of coffee she handed me. "Oh, we spent about 15 minutes discussing the actual book and 3 hours talking about Carol's daughter's wedding plans." She poured coffee for Troy as well, adding the precise amount of cream and sugar he preferred without having to ask. "You boys hungry? I can make pancakes." "That would be amazing, Mrs. Coleman," Troy said with his most charming smile. "If it's not too much trouble." "For you? Never trouble." She patted his cheek affectionately before turning to gather ingredients. As she moved around the kitchen, Troy and I fell into our public personas, joking about the movies we'd watched, discussing our plans for the day, carefully maintaining the invisible boundary between us. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this conscious modulation of every word and gesture. "So," my mother said casually as she flipped pancakes, "have you two given any more thought to rooming together in Boston? It seems like the perfect solution." Troy glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I gave a slight nod, permission to proceed with our tentative plan. "Actually, we've been talking about it," Troy said. "It makes sense financially, and we already know we can live together without killing each other." My mother laughed. "That's a solid foundation for any roommate situation." She slid plates of pancakes in front of us. "Your parents will be so relieved, Troy. Your mom was just saying last night how worried she is about you being alone in the big city." "I won't be alone," Troy said, his eyes meeting mine briefly. "I'll have Damien." Something in his tone must have caught my mother's attention, because she paused, spatula in hand, looking between us with a slight furrow in her brow. "Yes, of course you will." The moment passed, and breakfast continued with light conversation about Boston neighborhoods and moving logistics. After we'd finished eating, Troy announced he should head home to shower and change. "I'll walk you out," I offered, standing to clear our plates. "Leave those," Mom said, waving us away. "I'll take care of the dishes." At the front door, Troy and I hovered awkwardly, aware of my mother's presence just a room away, constraining our goodbye to a brief hug and promises to text later. As he walked down the driveway to cut through our adjoining yards to his house, I felt the familiar ache of separation, the phantom pain of having to let him go when all I wanted was to keep him close. I returned to the kitchen to find my mother at the sink, washing dishes with unusual concentration. Something about her posture, the tense set of her shoulders, sent a flicker of unease through me. "Need help?" I offered, picking up a dish towel. "No, thank you," she said, her voice oddly formal. "Actually, Damien, could we talk for a moment?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Those words, in that tone, never preceded anything good. "Sure, Mom. Everything okay?" She turned off the water and dried her hands methodically on a kitchen towel, her movements deliberate, as if buying time to organize her thoughts. When she finally faced me, her expression was unreadable. "Damien," she began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her approach. "When I got home this morning, I came upstairs to check on you. My blood ran cold." "Oh, you and Troy were asleep," she continued, her eyes fixed on mine. "In your bed. Together." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. All the careful precautions, all the years of secrecy, undone by a moment of carelessness. We'd fallen asleep, forgotten to set an alarm, failed to maintain the vigilance that had protected our secret for so long. "Mom," I started, but the words died in my throat. What could I say? What explanation could possibly undo what she'd seen? "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long have you and Troy been more than friends?" The direct question, asked without anger or accusation, just gentle curiosity, broke something open inside me. 6 years of hiding, of fear, of careful calculation, collapsed under the weight of her simple inquiry. Since we were 16, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It just happened. And then it kept happening. 6 years, she echoed, sounding stunned. All this time, and you never felt you could tell me? The hurt in her voice was worse than anger would have been. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. I wanted to. We both did. But we were scared. Of how you'd react. Of how it would change things between our families. Of what people in town would say. She sat across from me, reaching for my hands across the table. Oh, Damien, did you really think I wouldn't accept you? That I wouldn't love you, no matter what? It wasn't just about me, I tried to explain. It was about Troy too, and his family, and the complexity of all of it. We've been best friends our whole lives. Everyone sees us that way. Changing that narrative seemed impossible. My mother was quiet for a long moment, her thumbs tracing absent patterns on the backs of my hands. I understand fear, she said finally. I understand wanting to protect something precious. But love isn't something that should be hidden away, Damien. Not real love. Are you okay with it? I asked, hardly daring to hope. With us? Her smile was sad but genuine. I admit it's a surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't be. You two have always had a connection that seemed to transcend ordinary friendship. But am I okay with it? With you loving someone who is kind, intelligent, respectful, and who clearly loves you deeply in return? Of course I am. Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful it left me lightheaded. We were planning to tell you, I said, before we moved to Boston. We're going to get an apartment together, not as roommates, but as a couple. I see, she said, nodding slowly. That makes more sense now. The apartment discussions. Are you going to tell Troy's parents? The question came out more anxious than I intended. She seemed to consider this carefully. I think that's something you and Troy should do together, don't you? It's your story to tell. We're afraid, I admitted, of changing everything, of losing the support of the people we love. Change is scary, she acknowledged. But living a lie is exhausting. I've watched you, Damien. The careful way you monitor yourself around Troy when others are present, the relief when you two are alone. That's a heavy burden to carry. She was right, of course. The constant vigilance, the performance, the compartmentalization of our relationship had taken a toll neither of us fully recognized until we started imagining a life without those constraints. What should we do? I asked, feeling suddenly very young and uncertain. Talk to Troy, she advised, squeezing my hands. Tell him what's happened. Then decide together how and when to talk to his parents. They love him, Damien, just as I love you. That doesn't change because of who you love. And if it does? The fear that had kept us silent for 6 years couldn't be dismissed so easily. Then you'll face that together too, she said simply. And you'll have me in your corner, no matter what. After our conversation, I retreated to my room to process what had happened and to text Troy. The message I sent was simple. Mom knows. She saw us this morning. We need to talk. His response was immediate. Coming over now. 20 minutes later, Troy was back in my kitchen, facing my mother across the table while I sat beside him, our knees touching beneath the wood. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with apologies from both of us for the deception, but gradually evolved into something more honest and open than any discussion we'd had as a trio before. I've always thought of you as family, Troy, my mother said at one point. This just changes the particulars, not the sentiment. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, Troy replied, his voice thick with emotion. That means more than I can say. I think, under the circumstances, you can start calling me Linda, she said with a smile. By the time Troy left that evening, we had a plan. We would speak to his parents together the following weekend, with my mother present for moral support if needed. We would be honest about our relationship, our plans for Boston, our hopes for the future. Whatever happens, Troy said as we stood on my front porch, the setting sun painting the street in gold. We're in this together now. No more hiding. No more hiding, I agreed. And for the first time, I kissed him goodbye on my own front porch, in full view of anyone who might be watching. It felt like flying and falling simultaneously, terrifying and exhilarating. The week that followed was a strange limbo, the secret partially revealed, the burden partially lifted. My mother was true to her word, treating Troy exactly as she always had, though now with the occasional knowing smile when she caught us holding hands under the dinner table or sitting a little too close on the couch. When the day came to talk to Troy's parents, we were both nervous wrecks. We'd prepared what to say, practiced potential responses to their questions, steeled ourselves for every possible reaction from immediate acceptance to outright rejection. What we hadn't prepared for was Troy's mother saying, "Oh, honey, we've known for years." "What?" Troy stammered, looking between his parents in disbelief. "How?" "We found a love letter," his father explained, looking slightly uncomfortable but not unkind. "In your jacket pocket when you were 17. We were going to confront you about it, but then we talked to a counselor who advised us to let you come to us when you were ready. We've been waiting a long time for that moment," his mother added gently. "We were starting to think it might never come." The revelation that both sets of parents had known, or at least suspected, while we'd been so carefully maintaining our secret, was almost comical in its irony. All the anxiety, all the calculation, all the performance had been largely unnecessary. They had known, and they had continued to love us, waiting patiently for us to trust them with our truth. That night, as Troy and I sat on the old wooden swing in his backyard, processing the day's events, a sense of profound peace settled over me. The future stretched before us, still uncertain in many ways but clearer than it had ever been. "We could have told them years ago," Troy said, his fingers intertwined with mine. "Think of all the time we wasted being afraid." "It wasn't wasted," I disagreed. "We were figuring things out, growing into ourselves. Maybe we needed that time." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I'm glad we don't need to hide anymore." "Me too," I said, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I will miss the thrill of sneaking around a little bit." He laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet evening air. "I'm sure we can find other ways to keep things exciting." As summer progressed toward its inevitable conclusion, Troy and I found ourselves in an unexpected position. Openly in love in the town where we'd grown up, surrounded by people who had known us our whole lives. There were awkward moments, certainly. Not everyone was as accepting as our parents. There were raised eyebrows at the grocery store, whispered conversations that stopped when we approached, the occasional direct question about when we had decided to be gay. But there was also surprising support. Troy's former swim coach clapping him on the shoulder and saying, "About time you two figured it out." Mrs. Patterson from the library dropping off a rainbow cake with congratulations written in frosting. Even the elderly Mr. Winters from across the street gruffly offering to help us move furniture to Boston when the time came. In August, we signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, small but sunny, with a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Our parents helped us move, the four of them working together to transform the empty space into our first real home, never once commenting on the single bedroom or the queen-sized bed. On our first night alone in the apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture, Troy and I stood on our balcony, watching the lights of Boston twinkling in the distance. "I can't believe we're here," I said, still somewhat dazed by how much had changed in just a few months. "Together, officially." Troy wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Believe it. This is real, Damien. This is us, finally living our truth." I turned in his embrace to face him, taking in the features I'd known and loved for so long. The warm brown eyes, the crooked smile, the cowlick in his dark hair that never lay flat no matter how much product he used. "My best friend." My first love. My home, no matter where we lived. I love you, I said simply. I've loved you since we were 16, fumbling around in your basement, terrified and exhilarated and completely clueless. I loved you before that, he confessed. I just didn't have the words for it then. But I think I've loved you since we were kids, in whatever way I was capable of at each age. The realization that we'd been walking toward this moment our entire lives, through childhood adventures, adolescent confusion, early adult caution, to this place of openness and honesty, felt like completing a circle, like coming home after a long journey. No more hiding, I promised, echoing the vow we'd made on my porch that pivotal evening. No more hiding, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. My name is Damien, 22 years old, starting a new chapter in a new city with the person I've loved my entire life. Our path here wasn't straight or simple, but perhaps the most valuable journeys never are. And while I don't know exactly what the future holds for Troy and me, I know we'll face it together, openly and honestly, supported by the people who have loved us all along, even when we were too afraid to fully let them.